When she got home earlier, she saw her husband with her sister in bed. Her reaction was, "Before the story begins, comment below which city you're watching the video from. We love getting to know our viewers. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more exciting stories. Enjoy the story and see you soon." Elena never imagined that the sound of the door closing behind Carlos and Rosa on a sunny Saturday morning would be the prelude to the destruction of everything she believed to be true. The strong wind was hitting the windows of the house that she and Carlos had built with so much love. And while Oscar and Sofia were playing in the garden, Elena's world was beginning to crumble without her knowing. In the heart of the small town where they lived, everyone knew Elena as the calm woman who radiated a silent strength and unwavering peace. Her husband, Carlos, was a charismatic and kind man, always smiling and caring for the family with dedication. Her sister, Rosa, was her confidant, her friend, her support in difficult times. They were the pillars of her life, until something she could never imagine happened. Elena was coming home earlier after a weekend away. The idea was simple: surprise Carlos with an unexpected visit and spend the rest of the day together as a family. But when she opened the front door, it was as if time had stopped. Instead of the cozy home she knew, the air felt dense, heavy, and everything seemed strange. And then she saw it. Carlos, her husband, with his arms around Rosa, her sister, in an intimate way, as if they were lovers and not family. The ground opened beneath her feet, and the pain pierced her chest so sharply that she could hardly breathe. It wasn't words that were missing, but a cold certainty that in that moment, everything she had built had been destroyed by the ones she loved most. The impact was brutal. Elena's world, until that moment calm and secure, turned into a whirlwind. She didn't scream. It wasn't necessary. Her eyes, fixed on the couple before her, conveyed more pain than any word could express. Carlos, desperate, tried to justify himself, but his words sounded empty, like a distant echo. "It was a mistake, Elena. A slip-up." But Elena knew that no excuse could erase the cruelest betrayal she could have ever imagined. Rosa, with tears in her eyes, tried to speak, to apologize, but Elena didn't want to hear it. Those words were nothing more than an attempt to cover up the raw truth. Her sister, with whom she had shared her deepest secrets, had become the traitor of her trust. And Carlos was the man with whom she had built a life, the man who had promised to be with her forever. In a surge of anger and pain, Elena acted without thinking. With the strength of someone who no longer had anything to lose, she pushed Carlos away from herself, shoving him with a cry of pain and despair. Rosa tried to approach, but Elena, with her heart in pieces, expelled her from the house mercilessly. "Go away, Rosa. There's no more room for you here." The door slammed behind them, and Elena found herself alone with the weight of a betrayal she had never imagined facing. As the tears welled up in her eyes, she knew nothing would ever be the same again. Nothing. What lay ahead was a deep abyss, and Elena would need more than just strength to cross it. She would need to find a way back to herself, to her children, to the woman she had been before all this pain took over her life. Elena stood still in the middle of the living room, staring at the door that had just closed behind Carlos and Rosa. The sound seemed to reverberate in her mind, as if everything in her life had started to crumble. Her breath was quick, and her chest tight, as if an immense weight had settled inside her body. The house that had once seemed like a safe refuge now felt empty and cold, each corner reminding her of the betrayal she had just witnessed. She leaned against the wall, trying to stay firm. The children, Oscar and Sofia, were in the garden, playing as if nothing had happened, unaware of the emotional storm that had just descended upon their mother. Elena felt a deep anger, mixed with an indescribable pain. But above all, she felt a huge confusion. How could this have happened? How could she have trusted Carlos and Rosa so much? How could she have believed her life was perfect, only to see it all destroyed in an instant? Oscar, the oldest, came through the back door, his eyes curious and alert. He seemed to sense that something was wrong, though he didn't know exactly what. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, concern clear in his voice. Eleanor forced a smile, trying to disguise the emotional whirlwind consuming her mind. "Yes, my love, I'm just tired. Go play with Sophia, it's all right." But Oscar didn't leave. He was growing up fast, starting to realize that things between adults weren't always as they seemed. Elena knew she couldn't hide the truth for much longer. She looked at him and at Sophia, who was running around the garden, jumping and laughing, unaware of what was happening inside the house. This was what she wanted to give her life for, to protect that innocence. But now, how could she explain to them that the trust they had always had was broken, that the man who had always been the pillar of the family had gotten involved with Elena's own sister? The pain was unbearable, but she knew she had to act. She stood up, took a deep breath, and called them over. "I need to talk to you, it's important." Oscar and Sophia came closer, curious and concerned. Elena sat on a bench in the garden, her gaze distant, trying to find the right words for something that had no words enough. "What's going on, Mom?" Oscar asked, more seriously now. Elena looked at him with a tight heart. She knew that the truth, however painful, was necessary. "Daddy, he did something very wrong, and Aunt Rosa too." The words came out with immense weight, as if each syllable was being torn from her body. They were together, and I can't trust them anymore. Oscar fell silent, his eyes wide, while Sophia frowned, not fully understanding what was being said. Together? But Daddy and Aunt, they are our family. Sophia spoke, confused, her voice trembling. Elena squeezed Sophia's hand, feeling an even greater pain for having to destroy that image of safety and love her children had. "Sometimes people make very big mistakes, Sophia. And even though we want to understand why, we can't. What happened between Daddy and Aunt has no excuse." Oscar looked at his mother with a mature expression, but his eyes were watery. "But now, Mom, what's going to happen?" Elena didn't know how to answer. She knew nothing would ever be the same. "Now we move forward, the three of us. We'll continue our life together, with dignity and with the love we have. What happened was between the adults, and you are not to blame for anything." That night, after the children were in bed, Elena sat alone in the living room, staring at the phone. Carlos called, sent messages, trying to justify what he had done. Elena was too exhausted to listen to his empty words. She already knew that the trust had been broken in an irreparable way. It was then that she called Miguel, her longtime friend. She had always trusted him, but that night the pain was so deep that she hesitated before seeking support. When he answered, she could barely speak. "Miguel, it happened. I saw it with my own eyes. Carlos and Rosa, they were together." Miguel was silent for a moment. "I'm so sorry, Elena. I didn't know how much you were suffering. If you need me, I'm here, just like I've always been." His words were a relief, but Elena's pain was still present, like an open wound that she didn't know if it would ever heal. She knew that now she needed to make a difficult decision: divorce. Carlos was trying to apologize, asking for a chance, but Elena knew there was no longer any space for him in her life. The trust had been destroyed in a way that couldn't be repaired. She sat at the dining table, her thoughts still confused, but her decision clear. She needed to cut the ties, even if that meant giving up the life she had built with Carlos. The conversation with him would be inevitable, but Elena already knew what she would say. The next day was a whirlwind of emotions, but paradoxically, it also brought a sense of clarity to Elena. She woke up early, before Oscar and Sophia, and sat at the coffee table, her gaze fixed on the window where the sun was beginning to rise. Each ray of light seemed like a promise that, even in the midst of pain, something new could be born. The house was silent, without the sound of Carlos and without the familiar touch of Rosa, and Elena felt a relief that mixed with anguish. The peace she had always had seemed to be slowly returning, but at a very high price. She got up to prepare the coffee. Her hands were trembling, but not because of sadness. It was a new feeling, as if she were trying to reinvent herself. What would she do from now on? How would her life be without Carlos, without Rosa? It wasn't just the family bonds that had unraveled, but a part of Elena's identity that needed to be rebuilt. Oscar and Sofia woke up later, a little surprised by the calm of the morning. Elena made the coffee as usual, but the air in the house was different. "Mom, what are we going to do now?" Oscar asked with his usual seriousness while sipping his coffee. Elena looked at her children, her heart tight. She knew that despite her pain, the priority now was family, their safety. "Now we move forward, together. No matter what happened, you are my priority. You always have been and always will be." But inside Elena, a war was taking place. She knew that divorce was inevitable, but what else would she have to face? The idea of cutting ties not only with Carlos, but also with Rosa, was something she never imagined she'd need to do. She could no longer allow these people to remain in her life, as the wounds were too deep to be healed. Then the phone rang, and Carlos's voice, filled with regret, invaded the silent space of the house. "Elena, please, I need to talk to you. I can't lose you. It was a mistake. A momentary lapse. I love you. I really love you." She squinted her eyes, trying to contain the avalanche of emotions that surged with his words. He loved her? Or was it just the fear of loss speaking louder? But Elena no longer had the patience for empty apologies. "Carlos, you've destroyed everything. There's no more room for your love here. I can't trust you anymore, and even less Rosa." She hung up the phone firmly, feeling a slight sense of relief. But loneliness immediately took its place. It was as if the phone call had been the last thread tying her to a past that no longer existed. In the days that followed, Elena focused on what she could control: her home, her children, and the divorce process. But as much as she immersed herself in these tasks, a constant sense of emptiness accompanied her. She knew she needed something more, a purpose, a way to reclaim her identity. It was then that Miguel appeared again, offering support as only he knew how. He was a longtime friend, and Elena felt comfortable with him, but something had shifted between them. It wasn't the kind of change she was ready to explore just yet. There were still too many scars. "You're doing the right thing, Elena. The decision to move forward, not to let yourself be defined by this pain. It's the strongest thing you can do for yourself." Elena looked at Miguel, her eyes a little watery. She knew he was right, but the pain still dominated her. I don't know if I'm strong, but I know I can't live in this past anymore." Miguel smiled with a gentle expression. "You've always been stronger than you think, and with time, you'll realize that." Those words echoed in her mind, and for the first time, Elena felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could really move on. Meanwhile, Carlos kept trying to reconcile. He called, sent messages, and even tried to show up unexpectedly. Increasingly desperate, he showed himself incapable of accepting Elena's decision. She, in turn, ignored him firmly, feeling more and more uncomfortable with his attempts. He didn't understand that there was no longer any place for him in her life. At that moment, Elena made a final choice. She would not go back. Carlos and Rosa were out of her life. The divorce process continued, and she began taking the first steps toward a new reality, as scary as it was. She knew it wouldn't be easy, But the first step had already been taken, and that made her feel, for the first time in a long time, as if she were in control of her own story. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, painting the sky in warm shades of orange and pink. Elena was on the porch of her house, observing the scene when her children, Oscar and Sophia, approached. They were already used to the silence that had permeated the house since Carlos's departure, but today something felt different in the air. Elena seemed more serene, and at the same time there was an intensity in her eyes, as if she were about to make another important decision. "How was your day, Mom?" asked Oscar with his usual maturity. "Good, son, good." Elena smiled, but her mind was far away, thinking about everything that had happened in the past days. She knew that the pain of losing the family she once knew and loved was still present, but something in her heart told her she was ready to take the next step, even if that step was painful. In recent days, Eleanor had immersed herself in work, dedicating herself to writing and the project of the book about her overcoming experience. When she decided to return to her journalism career, something ignited inside her. It was as if writing was the only way to release everything she was feeling. Every word written was a healing for her soul. She began visiting old archives, searching through stories of other women who, like her, had overcome adversity. It made her feel less alone. She was at home, typing furiously on her computer, when she received an unexpected call. It was Rosa. The name on the display made her stomach churn, but she didn't hesitate to answer. "Elena, please, listen to me. I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I know there's no excuse for what I did, but I love you, and I don't want to lose our relationship. You've always been my best friend. I know the pain is great, but please, let me explain." Elena closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the words. Every syllable from Rosa was like a knife lodged in her chest. The pain she caused, her sister's betrayal, was not something easy to overcome. But Elena knew that to move forward, she needed to take action. "Rosa, I have nothing more to say. You've destroyed everything. What you and Carlos did is unforgivable. No matter how much you try to convince me, I can't trust you again." Rosa, clearly emotional on the other end of the line, tried to insist. But Elena didn't give in. She knew her decision was final. What more could she say? There was no more space for apologies. No matter how difficult it was, she needed to move forward. And for that, she had to cut the ties that bound her to the past. Elena hung up the phone, the tension in her body slowly dissipating. It wasn't easy, but she knew she had done what needed to be done. Carlos hadn't given up either, showing up at her house again, begging to talk. But Elena simply ignored him, closing the door without even looking at him. In the following days, she focused more on her work and, little by little, began to build a new routine. Sophia and Oscar were her foundation, and she focused on providing them with a safe and welcoming home. They were starting to notice the strength she was showing, and that made her feel even more determined. However, Elena's internal struggle continued. She still felt vulnerable, and Miguel, the longtime friend, remained a constant presence in her life. Every encounter with him brought a mix of emotions. There was an attraction that Elena couldn't deny, but she stayed firm in her decision not to let anyone hurt her again. On a quiet afternoon, while at a cafe with Miguel, he surprised her with an unexpected conversation. "Elena, I know you're going through a tough time, and I respect your space. But if you ever need someone to talk to, know that I'm here, not just as a friend, but as someone who cares deeply about you." Elena looked at him, her gaze intense. She knew Miguel wasn't just a friend. He had always been there in all the tough times, but she didn't know if she was ready to open her heart again. I really appreciate your words, Miguel. You've been such a huge support to me. But for now, I need to find myself. I can't allow myself to depend on anyone, not even you. Miguel smiled softly. I understand, Elena. I just want you to know that no matter what happens, I'll be by your side. Those moments with Miguel always left Elena with a bitter taste in her mouth. She didn't want to fall in love again, didn't want to hurt herself again. But something inside her, maybe a spark of hope, hadn't been completely extinguished. Meanwhile, Carlos didn't give up. In a final desperate attempt, he appeared at Elena's door, holding a letter. Please, read it. I can't live without you. Elena stared at him for a moment without saying a word, but in her heart, she knew there was nothing more to be said. She looked at her children, felt Oscar's hand tighten around hers, and knew she was doing the right thing. She was no longer alone. She had herself, she had her children, and most importantly, she had the certainty that she was moving toward a future where she could finally be who she really wanted to be. The sky was clearer that morning, and the scent of fresh coffee filled the house as Elena prepared breakfast for her children. Oscar and Sophia were in the living room, messing with their books and toys, oblivious to the feeling still bubbling in their mother's heart. But in that moment, Elena felt that, for the first time in a long time, she was beginning to feel complete again. The cycle of pain and loss she had been going through for weeks seemed to be lessening. After her conversation with Carlos and her refusal to reconcile with Rosa, Elena decided it was time to give her life a new direction. She knew she couldn't keep living in the past, tied to the mistakes and traumas that surrounded her. She looked at Oscar and Sophia with a tender smile and felt a renewed energy, something that pushed her forward. She was determined to be the best mother she could be, not just for them, but for herself. She had left her journalism career behind when she married Carlos, but now, with the divorce underway, she felt stronger and more determined to resume her career. For months, she had been writing drafts and outlines for her book, telling the story of her overcoming, and now she felt she was closer to bringing that work to life. That day, after dropping the kids off at school, she headed to the local cafe where she used to write. She sat at a corner table with a view of the quiet street in front of her. With her laptop open, she began typing the words that, for so long, had been trapped inside her. The pages quickly filled with emotional accounts, with her raw and deep truth. Each sentence freed her a little more. As Elena immersed herself in her writing, something inside her alerted her. It was a subtle feeling, but she couldn't ignore it. Miguel. He had always been present in her life, and in the past few months, his friendship had been one of the few things that kept her balanced. Even so, Elena knew he wasn't just a friend. There was a connection that went beyond that, but she hesitated to acknowledge it. The pain of betrayal was still fresh in her memory, and she didn't want to risk getting hurt again. Miguel knew this. He knew Elena needed time and space to heal her wounds, but he was willing to wait. He believed in her, believed in the strong, independent woman she was, and he knew that soon she would realize there was nothing wrong with opening her heart again. One day, while Elena was reviewing one of the chapters of her book, Miguel showed up at the cafe. He approached with a subtle smile, as he always did. Elena couldn't help but notice the concern in his eyes, something she had seen in his gaze many times before. It wasn't just friendship, it was something more, something she was still reluctant to admit. Miguel, I don't know what I'm doing, Elena said, her voice low, hesitant. I feel so lost sometimes. I feel like I'm doing well, but everything feels uncertain. Everything is uncertain. Miguel pulled up a chair and sat next to her. I understand, Elena. I just want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm here. You don't have to decide anything now, but never forget that you're not alone. Miguel's words touched a deep place in Elena. She smiled, not forced, but genuinely. Even with the scars from the past, She felt she was starting to heal, little by little, with the support of the people who truly cared about her. In the days that followed, Elena dedicated herself even more to her healing journey. She began getting involved in a support group for women facing challenges similar to hers. The volunteer work with women who had suffered emotional abuse not only helped her better understand her own pain, but also made her realize that despite everything she had been through, she was in a better place now. The work with these women gave her a sense of purpose she had never known she needed. They shared their stories, and Elena shared hers. It was as if, together, they were writing a new chapter for their lives, and the experience made her realize how transformative mutual support could be. She was no longer a woman lost in her pain. She was building a new life for herself and her children. Although she still felt cautious about Miguel, Elena couldn't deny that he was a comforting presence in her life. Their friendship was growing, and she finally allowed herself to feel a little lightness in his company. But at the same time, she knew she needed to do this for herself. She needed to be independent, above all. Only then could she give herself to a new relationship without fears or dependencies. And as she returned home that evening, seeing Oscar and Sophia laughing and playing together, Elena had an inexplicable sense of peace. She knew that, despite the obstacles, she was on the right path. She was rebuilding herself, piece by piece, and more, she understood that true strength came from within. The future was still uncertain, but Elena was learning to embrace it, with all its challenges and uncertainties. And above all, she was starting to believe again in the power of transformation, because perhaps life was really about new beginnings. Elena had always believed that time had the power to heal all wounds. But as the months went by, she began to realize that time alone was not enough. The past, no matter how much she tried to distance herself from it, still resurfaced in unexpected moments. That morning was a clear example of this. Elena was at her desk, with the book of overcoming stories open in front of her, when the phone rang. It was a message from Carlos, another failed attempt to reconnect. She looked at the screen, and for a moment, her heart tightened. It was hard not to feel the weight of those words, especially knowing that Carlos was still trying to get closer, justifying himself. He was insisting once again that she forgive him. But with each message, with each apology, Elena felt that the distance between them grew even wider. She knew it wasn't just him trying to deal with what had happened. She was doing the same, but in a different way. Every word from him reminded her of the pain of being betrayed, the pain of being deceived by those she trusted most. It was as if, even with the physical distance, Carlos still occupied a space in her life. But no longer because of love. Now all that was left was a desire to leave the past behind. "I can't do this anymore, Carlos," Elena whispered to herself. "I can't let the weight of the past define me." She blocked Carlos's number, feeling a mix of relief and sorrow. It was a painful but necessary decision. She could no longer be tied to a man who had destroyed her trust and disrespected her in every possible way. No matter how much he tried, nothing could change what had happened. As she was immersed in this thought, the phone rang again. It was a message from Rosa. Elena looked at the screen, and for a moment she didn't know what to do. Her sister, with whom she had always had such a close relationship, now seemed like the last person she could turn to. Rosa was still trying, with gentle words, to apologize and restore the bond that had been irreparably broken. She hesitated, but this time her decision was firmer. She no longer wanted to be part of Rosa's life. She needed to cut all ties, even if the pain was too much to bear. "I need to move on," Elena thought. That day, Elena decided it was time to face the ghosts of the past and close the cycles that had kept her trapped. She knew what was to come wouldn't be easy, but she also knew it was the only way to finally free herself. And for that, she had to face her own fears. She spent the rest of the morning reviewing her book. But more than the words she was writing, she reflected on her own journey. She looked at the pages and saw more than stories of overcoming. She saw her own process of healing and reinvention. This was her truth, her therapy, and she needed to finish this project as soon as possible. At the end of the day, Elena sat with Oscar and Sofia, as she always did, and hugged them tightly, with a smile that now carried a new calm. They were her strength. They reminded her every day that there was something much bigger than the pain she had felt. There was the chance for a new beginning. Miguel was starting to become a constant presence in her life. Elena knew that if she looked closely, she might see more than just friendship there. But for now, she preferred to keep her distance. She was finding herself, and she didn't want to lose herself again. She needed time to reflect on what she really wanted for the future. Elena's phone rang again, but this time she decided to ignore it. The sound of the device, which used to make her stop what she was doing, now seemed insignificant. Instead, she looked at Oscar and Sofia and made a silent promise to herself. She was ready to face whatever was coming. She was ready to be the woman she always knew she could be. She was no longer defining her life by what she had lost, but by what she could still achieve. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with orange and golden hues. Elena sat on the porch with a cup of tea in her hands, watching the horizon. The children were already in bed, and she allowed herself a moment of peace. The silence of the house, once filled with tension and sadness, now felt welcoming. The loneliness, which once terrified her, had become her ally. Elena was beginning to realize how much she had changed. The mourning for the loss of her previous life was still present, but it no longer dominated her. She felt the weight of the pain being replaced by a lightness she hadn't experienced in a long time. Time had become her friend, and she was beginning to rediscover the power of putting herself first. But there was still something that bothered her. Carlos continued trying to contact her in various ways. He sent messages, called, and even showed up at her door without warning. In a moment of weakness, Elena gave in and answered one of his calls. The conversation, however, did not go as he had hoped. Carlos, with a choked voice, said, "Elena, I was wrong. I know I can't fix what I've done, but I want to try. Please, give me a chance. I love you." Those words, which before would have been enough to shake her defenses, now sounded empty. Elena felt at peace, realizing her decision was made. The anger she had felt toward him no longer consumed her. In fact, she only felt a distant compassion, but not enough to change her decision. She no longer needed Carlos in her life. The truth was, the love she had felt for him had already died, and words couldn't resurrect it. "I can't do this anymore, Carlos," she said, her voice calm and firm. "The pain you caused is irreparable. No matter how much you love me now, what you did is unforgivable." The call ended, and Elena allowed herself to breathe deeply, relieved. She was no longer a prisoner of the past and his feelings. Instead, she was becoming the woman she had always wanted to be, a woman capable of taking control of her life and following her own path. Night fell, and as if everything around her was aligning with her decision, a sense of peace took over Elena. The silence in the house was no longer something to fear. Now it was a space where she could rebuild herself and reflect on the next steps. The next morning, while having coffee in the kitchen, Elena was interrupted by a message from Miguel. They had briefly spoken in the past few weeks, and although she was still cautious about his role in her life, he continued to be an important presence. "How are you today? If you need someone to talk to, I'm here," the message read. Elena smiled, tapping the screen of her phone. She knew that Miguel cared about her, but deep down, she wasn't ready to fully embrace this new bond. There was something comforting in their friendship, and for now, that was enough. She didn't need more complications. She decided to reply briefly but sincerely, "I'm fine. Life is going its course, and thank you, Miguel, for always being here." She set the phone aside and turned her attention back to the house. The silence now seemed full of possibilities. Her children, Oscar and Sofia, were the foundation of her new life, and she was determined to build something solid for them. Their relationship had grown stronger over time, and she was sure she could create a healthy, loving environment for them, far from the shadows of the past. Little by little, Elena resumed her activities, rediscovering her passion for writing and diving deeper into her journey of self-discovery. But one thing was clear: she was ready to take a definitive step toward the future. The past was now just a lesson that had shaped her, and from it, she learned the strength of not allowing anyone, not even the pain, to define her life. As the morning unfolded, Elena prepared herself for another day of challenges and achievements. But as she looked at her children, she knew that the worst was behind her. True freedom came from the certainty that in the end, the power to move forward was in her hands. The gentle sound of the leaves swaying in the wind filled Elena's room as she woke up, the sun filtering through the window. She was in a different place than where she had started, a place of acceptance, her gaze fixed on the photo of Oscar and Sofia on the nightstand, a smiling picture from a Sunday morning. Their lives were becoming the center of everything for her, and with that came a new purpose. In the past few days, Elena had felt more connected with herself than ever before. She didn't need anyone's approval to be happy. She had reached emotional autonomy and was beginning to reclaim the woman she was before everything happened. The process of writing her book was taking shape, a therapeutic tool that not only gave her a voice, but also helped her organize her thoughts, put the pain into words, and transform it into something that could one day help others. She was reconnecting with her career as a journalist, a job she had left behind when she fully devoted herself to marriage and family life. She missed the adrenaline of a good story, the thrill of interviewing someone, writing something that touched people. Although her book was a personal reflection, she knew she needed more, something that challenged her intellectually. It was time to return to her old life, where she wasn't just a mother and wife, but an independent woman with her own dreams. One late afternoon, when the office was quiet, Elena's phone rang. It was Miguel. They had exchanged brief messages in the past few weeks, but the conversations were never long. However, now she felt she could be more open with him, without pressure, just as friends. "Hey, Miguel, how's it going?" Elena said as she answered, trying to hide a small smile in her voice. "Hey, Elena, I just wanted to know how you're doing. I've been thinking about what you told me the last time we talked. Do you feel ready to take new steps? To live life the way you want?" Miguel asked, his voice warm and gentle. Elena paused for a moment. The question made her reflect on what she truly wanted for her future. She had already taken huge steps to free herself from the pain, but now there was the possibility of a new beginning, something she wasn't entirely sure how to define. "I think I'm starting to understand what you mean, Miguel. I'm walking toward my own dreams. I'm still adjusting, but I feel like finally I can breathe. I can be who I want to be, without feeling like I need to be something to please others." "I'm happy to hear that," Miguel said. "You deserve to be happy, Elena. And if you need help moving forward, just let me know." Miguel's words made Elena feel a new wave of gratitude. He was becoming more than just a friend. He was being a true emotional support, someone who respected her boundaries while encouraging her to grow. However, she knew that her path was still solo. She was beginning to reconnect with her true essence, and in that moment, she realized that her happiness depended solely on herself. The next morning, Elena had an idea. She no longer wanted to be the woman who was just recovering from trauma. She wanted to be the woman who took charge of her life, who made decisions for herself. She decided that she would return to writing for publications, that she would seek something that challenged her in a new way, without external pressures, but with the confidence of someone who had rebuilt herself. Oscar and Sophia were growing, becoming more independent, and Elena knew it was the right time to take another step. She wanted to be an inspiration for them, not just a protective mother, but a woman who showed, through her actions, the power of reinvention. That day, as she walked through the streets of her city, Elena had a mental conversation with herself. She looked around and saw the possibilities. She no longer needed to live with the shadows of the past. The scars wouldn't disappear, but they wouldn't define her either. Now, it was time to write a new chapter in her life, and for that, she needed courage. But courage came from within, from her own determination to move forward. Elena woke up early that day once again. The sun was beginning to pour into the house with a soft light, and she felt grateful to be in a place of peace. But something was different today. She felt a change inside her, something she couldn't fully explain, but she knew she was about to make an important decision. Elena's phone rang before she had a chance to concentrate on her thoughts. The number on the screen made her stomach knot. It was Carlos. She never expected to speak to him again, but his name there, after so many months of silence, made her heart race. She hesitated for a moment, but then answered, "Elena." His voice was calmer, more humble than she remembered. "I know you don't want to hear this, but I'm so sorry. I made a terrible mistake and I regret everything. I know nothing can be undone, but I just wanted to know if there's a possibility for me to at least try to make things right." Carlos's voice was full of remorse, but Elena couldn't be deceived by the words. She knew words were too easy for someone who had destroyed everything. She knew he was still trying to find a way back into her life, and that left a bitter feeling in her. "No, Carlos, there's no possibility anymore," Elena said firmly, trying to keep calm. "You didn't just destroy a relationship. You destroyed the trust I had in you. And there aren't enough excuses to change that." Carlos was silent for a moment. "Elena, I love you. I know I made a mistake, but our story can't end like this." Elena felt a weight on her chest, but her words were ready. She had already made her decision. "Carlos, what you and Rosa did wasn't just a mistake. It was a deep betrayal. I gave you my trust, and you betrayed me in the cruelest way possible. I can't live with this anymore, and you need to accept that there's no longer any place for you in my life." Before he could say anything else, she hung up the phone. The feeling of relief was instant, but it also came with a weight. It was the end of something she had believed was real, but in reality had been broken from the start. The day went on, and Elena returned to her work feeling stronger. She knew she couldn't go back. What Carlos wanted no longer mattered. What mattered now was what she would do with her life moving forward. She couldn't allow herself to live in the past anymore, and she couldn't allow herself to live in the shadow of what he and Rosa had done. In the late afternoon, after a day filled with difficult decisions, Elena met with Miguel, as she had been doing often in the past few weeks. They sat at the local cafe, the place that had now become a resting spot for both of them. Elena looked at him, her eyes still reflecting the pain of what she had just experienced. "I talked to him," Elena said without further delay. "I finally told him that there's no turning back. I can't allow him to come after me anymore. He tried, but I know now it's time to move on." Miguel smiled softly. "You did what you had to do, Elena. I know it wasn't easy for you, but I can see that you're stronger than ever. I'm proud of you." She took a deep breath, feeling a mix of emotions. "I thought maybe there was still something, but now I see there was nothing left. Just hurt, just lies. I'm glad I did it." Miguel looked at her seriously, as if trying to read her soul. "And now?" What will you do?" Elena smiled, a smile that bloomed on her face like a flower at dawn. "Now I'm going to live. I'm going to do what I've always wanted, be who I've always been. I don't need anyone to feel complete." Miguel looked at her with a new admiration. There was something more in his gaze, something Elena hadn't recognized until then. But she wasn't ready for it. Not yet. That night, after Oscar and Sofia had fallen asleep, Elena sat at her desk with a cup of hot tea in her hands. She looked at the manuscript of her book, now almost complete. The words were there, a reflection of her journey. It was all she would need to take the next step in her life. It was time to truly be free. The warm Saturday afternoon breeze blew through the trees in the garden, and Elena smelled freedom in the air. It was the kind of feeling she had never imagined she would have again. For so long, she had lived in the shadow of pain, in the darkness of betrayal. But now everything felt different. There was something in her gaze, something reflected in the way she moved, in the way she breathed. Life was back in her. She looked at her children, Oscar and Sofia, who were playing in the garden. It was there, with them, that she found her true peace. The pain was still present, but now it was a reminder of how strong she was. What she went through hadn't broken her. On the contrary, it had shaped her into someone more capable of facing any challenge. Miguel called her in the morning, as he always did. But this time he asked if she would like to go out, not as friends, but as something more. She knew what that meant, and for a moment, something inside her faltered. The temptation to seek the comfort she knew so well, to give in to what could be a new chance at happiness, was real. But she knew she wasn't ready for that. Not yet. "Miguel, I need more time. What I'm living now, what I'm feeling, is something I've never felt before. I need to learn to put myself first. I can't dive into a new relationship, no matter how wonderful you are. I need to be okay with myself first." There was a pause on the other end of the line, but Miguel just smiled, understanding her need for space. "I understand, Elena, and I'll be here for you, no matter which path you choose." She smiled as she heard his words. That's what she needed to hear. Not promises of immediate happiness, but respect for her journey. Because in that moment, the only person she needed to love was herself. The afternoon passed, and the house filled with little moments of joy. Oscar and Sofia were growing up quickly, maturing in ways Elena hadn't imagined. They were creating their own stories, their own paths, while she was also building hers. She dedicated more time to her book, which would soon be published, and felt that, with every word she wrote, she was freeing herself even more from the weight of the past. Independence was now her greatest achievement, and there was no room for fear or doubt. Every step she took on her journey was more certain than the last. Looking at the future, Elena saw a horizon full of possibilities, dreams to be realized, and she was ready to embrace each one. She didn't know where life would take her, but now she knew she would be able to walk any path as long as she was the one guiding her steps. As the sun set, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, Elena sat by the window with Oscar and Sofia by her side. They were closer than ever, and the house, once full of distrust and pain, now radiated a new energy. With every laugh from her children, Elena felt the weight of the old life dissipating, and she no longer cared about what was left behind. She smiled, finally at peace with herself. Life is mine now, she thought, and for the first time in a long while, she truly believed it. The future was hers, and so we come to the end of Elena's story. A woman who, despite betrayals and deep pain, found the strength to start over and build a freer, more promising future. Her journey of overcoming not only inspires us to reflect on what really matters in life, but also teaches us to value our inner peace and our ability to move forward no matter what happens. But before you go, If you enjoyed this emotional story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give us a like to support our work, and hit the bell so you don't miss any chapters of other stories like this. Now, we want to know your opinion. What do you think of Elena's decision to distance herself from her sister Rosa to move forward with her life? Do you think in her place you could have made the same decision? Or do you believe that family ties should prevail over the pain of betrayal? Leave your answer in the comments, as we'd really like to know what you think about this difficult part of Elena's story. Your interaction is very important to us. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video, where we'll bring more stories that will touch your heart. Stay tuned.